Will put some light. It's like a train in
You
the
should rename this the airport dialogue.
We have to be committed. We have to be consistent.
So Manu will definitely have some insight on that. He's been very like suspiciously quiet.
Hello and welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the India Dialogue. We're grateful that you're willing to give us a listen. My name is Ruchir. Normally we have Guru join us too, but unfortunately he's been on the road. So today it's Mitali, Manu and I. Mitali Mukherjee, besides being a director of journalism at the Reuters Institute, she's well known for her work at CNBC. Manu Shanmugan Sundaram, or Manu, is not only a successful advocate with his own law practice, but also a spokesperson for DMK, and I am the CEO of Distributed Energy and chair at the School of Policy and Governance. We're doing this because we care about India and want to discuss issues in a way that adds value. We're all friends and want to discuss important issues in India, sensitive or not, friendly disagreements or not, without having to shout at each other or live in slogans. For now, this is an experiment that we want to run in the build up to the 2024 national elections. Maybe we continue after, maybe we stop, but we want to give this a shot and help unpack important issues for India. Great, let's get this going. As always, we have a few issues to cover. Today, Mitali will lead us off. Mitali?
Thanks, Ruchir. And before I start, a couple of things. It's great to get feedback from people who are watching and listening. We're here to have this conversation because we hope it's helpful. So, please write to us, give us your criticism, give us your accolades. Everything's welcome. And the other is that you may notice in today's conversation, some of the audio might be a bit spotty. It's literally because all of us are in completely different geographical locations, and we're making an effort to make this chat happen. So excuse some of the tech glitches, but the conversation will be rich as always. So we've picked a couple of topics today. The one we want to kick off with is the Uniform Civil Code. Which has recently been announced, debated quite hotly on social media, of course, but announced in Uttarakhand. I don't want to sort of, over explain this, but I will say that essentially the Uniform Civil Code looks at addressing or putting in place particular sets or norms that should conform to all religions, all cultures. And with Uttarakhand, of course, this is looking specifically at issues of marriage, divorce, succession, something that really raised eyebrows amongst people who were reading what the content of this was the specific details that were given around what a live-in relationship should entail from the Uniform Civil Code's point of view, what couples who enter into that live-in relationship should be required to do, and there are some clear differences between how it would work in a marriage. For instance, you have to have parental permission over here till the age of 21. You are required to register in a local police office. Police station, I beg your pardon. You are required to identify yourself, failing which there are penalties, including financial penalties. And it's an interesting one, I think, to just explore what it is that blurs the line between state and private individual. So let me start with Manu to understand the legalities of this. And the reason this is important also, Manu, is because the Uniform Civil Code is something that's been talked about at a national level as well, right?
So the interesting thing about this particular venture or adventure of the Uttarakhand government is this, that it is by a state-led government. It's not the union government that has come up with the Uniform Civil Code. Of course, the first thing we need to look at is, why is Uttarakhand fronting this? And why is this happening now, very strategically timed around the same time as the ongoing parliament session, and of course, hardly 2-3 weeks away from election notification for the 2024 general elections. Uttarakhand, as you know, is one of the good states, but definitely nowhere where it should be, right? In terms of infant mortality, maternal mortality, education, other human development indices. So why is this an issue in Uttarakhand? Or rather, why is this an issue anywhere in India now? Have there been protests for the UCC? Have people sort of taken to the streets like they did almost 10 years ago, asking for better women's safety laws? Have people taken to rallies like they did when they supported Jallikattu in Chennai, or the famous anti-corruption or the Lokpal agitation in Delhi some years ago? No, that's not the case, right? So where does this come from? The obvious answer is it's come from an ideological position held by a government. Now that is fine. They have BJP governments have made no, they've never hidden the fact that they want to push for the uniform civil code. So let us see this in the context of the last 4 or 5 years of what has happened in this country. And perhaps that will throw some light on why this is being brought. Of course, the argument put forth by those who support the Uniform Civil Code is it does uh, level the gender equality index. It does provide, a greater deal, or it evens out the differences and the blips otherwise that religious/personal laws have brought into our society. So let us see the last 3-4 years. These are the three sort of reforms that come into my mind: triple talaq, Article 370 abrogation, and now the Uniform Civil Code, right? And again, there are I'm not being consistent here because Article 370 was Parliament led. Uniform Civil Code, as I said, is Uttarakhand led. But understand the underlying thesis here, which is that one community or other communities who are religious minorities have gotten a better deal. So triple talaq, Article 370, and Uniform Civil Code, according to me, all are founded upon this idea or notion that especially Muslims have gotten a better deal. They have been appeased, they have been pacified, and successive earlier governments have not leveled the playing field. Now, this is being done by governments, etc. And of course, in Article 370's case, the Supreme Court has also agreed with the government. So that is the position now. If you take the other large scale reform around religion, though it is not directly on religion, is Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, which I think is an extension of this idea that it has to be a promised land for Hindus, as they say, the Hindu Rashtra. So, Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, for those who sort of forgotten it, is that it allows a better sort of citizenship status or citizenship access for Hindus as long as they come from Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Bangladesh. Now, it's quite interesting that Hindus from Sri Lanka, for example, are not considered as part of this, even if they, we know that close to 150,000 Hindus have fled Sri Lanka due to the ethno-linguistic conflict in the last 40 years. So again, like I said, all of this is to show that India will be a promised land for Hindus, and that the existing communities, especially minority communities, especially Muslims, have gotten a better deal. So now the Uniform Civil Code will even all of this out. So I just want to make one or two points, right, which is to do with, for the first time now, we have a draft of the actual Uniform Civil Code. Though it has been legislated just earlier yesterday, we now have a clear idea of what a government or a state thinks of Uniform Civil Code. Until now, we were sort of arguing from ideological positions. So now it's very clear. Now, one thing I find very interesting is how they've dealt with live-in relationships. And this has also been, raised in the last 24 hours by a number of people, including senior advocate Sanjay Ghosh in an article for a legal newsletter. But what it says is, as soon as you enter into a live-in relationship, within 30 days, you must go to the registrar office and register yourself. Now, that is on par with marriage. It says every marriage also must be registered. So that's fine. You have the same benchmark for live-in relationships and marriage. However, I find it a bit interesting, especially for same-sex or queer relationships. The entire Supreme Court battle last year was around marriage equality. So now you want to give people a equality in registration or equality in recognition before a statutory authority like the registrar, but the government, and definitely the BJP-led governments, do not want to give them marriage equality. I find this a little bit funny, a little bit hypocritical, and also not very well thought out. So I think that was interesting how they want same sex or live-in couples in live-in relationships to go register on par with marriages, but they don't want to give them the ability to marry. I mean, that would have been really, I think, a way to sort of be progressive. Of course, in other aspects, we still have to see the rules, because ultimately the act just lays out the provisions to enable how this law will come into force, but it is the rules. So for a
Yeah.
live-in relationship, how do you go register? What do you show to prove that two people are in a shared household, right? That's the real tricky part. Of course, for marriage, you go with customs and you go with how ceremonies are held. The Hindu Marriage Act has certain ceremonies. The Self-Respect Marriage Act has certain things, and otherwise. So the hard part is how this will actually be implemented. Of course, like I said, there is no real push. There was no real push for it now. There was no popular movement. There was no petitions filed saying that we want uniform civil code now. So it clearly is positioning. It is showing. It is signaling to the larger voting population across the country that the BJP will bring this about. How it will be implemented, it is still very unclear. But like
Yeah.
I said, what we have now is, I think, an extension of what we have seen for the last 3-4 years, from triple talaq to Article 370. It is this continuous dog whistling or reminding to the larger majority community that the minorities have gotten away with too much. Now is the time to, bring equality. And I think that starts officially the sort of the signaling for the larger election campaign, according to me, Mitali.
Let me unpack that a bit, Manu, and let's delve into the specific point you made about live-in relationships, and of course, Ruchir will add in as well. But just to answer this, because this may be a question that is raised in defense of this, what gives you the sense that this would be the model for what the UCC might look like at at a national level? Why do you think it seems to be specifically targeting Muslims as a minority? And then what follows from there is there are incidents and cases where women do approach the court for legal justice when they feel they have been wronged in relationships that may not have a marriage contract underlying it. um, is there sort of truth to the fact that this sort of a UCC model is a potential solution to those situations?
There is already enough within our domestic violence legislation to for any people who are in a relationship like a marriage. That's the sort of benchmark we use. So anyone who shares a marital or a household where they are living together, they are entitled to domestic violence protections. So it does not discriminate between a married couple or a live-in couple. So that is already there. Now, what I felt was problematic with this particular treatment of live-in relationships is that, on one hand, government, the union government, especially BJP-led governments, have opposed tooth and nail, giving marriage status to queer relationships. But yeah, on the other hand, they want them registered, which I think, like I said, it's a missed opportunity. According to me, they should have gone all the way and provided opportunity for queer couples to also get married. Nevertheless, I think it is fair to say that this is a good solution for live-in relationships, right? But how it will play out, how will de facto relationships play out in Indian society? The real trick is, once they register, what benefits do they get from that? Can they get a joint bank account? Can they now put their name as next of kin? Can they put each other's names, as the nominee in the case of a death or an insurance policy? Those are the real issues that we will have to deal with. But to answer the larger question around live-in relationships, there's enough protection within Indian law per se at the moment. So this is not going to be the solution in that sense for live-in relationships. Now, the targeting of Muslims or other is not, according to me, this is not going to directly impact the lives of Muslims like many other state actions have. But this what is being done, as I've seen in the last 24 hours, is that is the ethos of the justification that's being used. The same justification that was used at the time of Article 370 is why should Kashmir enjoy a special status? Why can't I go and buy land in Kashmir? Why should Kashmir have its own constitution? Why should Kashmir be exempt from laws that apply to the rest of the country? Again, even with triple talaq, the justification, the reasoning, the grounds raised by the pro BJP or the BJP supporters is the same, right? I mean, why are Muslims entitled to anything more, than what others are entitled to? I think, like I said, this is a larger signaling that is done, that Muslims have gotten more right from the time of the independence or the partition or the formation of the Muslim League and the eventual sort of ceding of territory in Pakistan in what is now Bangladesh, to all the different sort of privileges that have been granted to Muslims, to Pakistan first and then Muslims who stayed back in India. This really, I think, is the narrative that we will see. And like I said, that is not a healthy narrative. And again, I want to go back to my initial question: why is Uttarakhand putting this forth now? The if you ask me, the 3 or 4 big schemes that are Tamil Nadu is engaged in, it is one, uh, 1,000 rupee monthly entitlement scheme for every woman in recognition of the domestic labor that they do and the unpaid sort of domestic labor that they do. It is the extension of the midday meal scheme in all government schools to a breakfast scheme, so there is less work in the poor family that morning to set up breakfast also for a child. And three, to give every woman who wants to take a bus in any of the cities in Tamil Nadu a free bus pass, right? To say that that is how entrepreneurship will thrive and survive. But like I said, while other states are focusing on different issues, and of course in the larger context of what is going on today, which is states are fighting against the union to say, give us more back of our fiscal share. This is a very interesting, I think, step from the Uttarakhand Assembly, and to put it out at this particular point of time, like I said, I think tells me that there is a larger sort of signaling to what the rest of the country, what BJP can and will do should it be re-elected in the 2024 elections.
And I think I will add, as we have in previous conversations, which is encouraging people listening or watching to read the document for yourselves. Um, I learned some interesting things about how relationships between two individuals are defined. And apparently, it's full blood, half blood, uterine blood. Um, so it's a bit Orwellian in terms of the details. And I think, just going back to the point you were making, Manu, about the live in relationships, it's also the nature of what happens if you don't, right? I mean, with a marriage, you can pay a fine, you carry out the registration. In this situation, the indication from the document is that if you don't register it, you could actually be attracting a jail sentence. Ruchir, you've lived in and worked in many different countries. Have you seen one like this before?
I didn't know the opposite was possible. Obviously, like I lived in Australia for a while and they had de facto relationship status. I think UK calls it cohabiting rights.
Yeah.
That part sounds progressive because then marriage is not the center of the universe, although our culture might disagree.
But
The idea,
voluntary, I mean, even in the UK, it's voluntary for the two
in fact,
people. Yeah.
you don't even have to register. You just, if there are disputes, you basically prove that you had cohabiting rights, and then you flesh out the agreement. I agree. I mean, I'm curious, Manu, on that point. Is there a benefit of registering? Like, are we falling behind? What I'm thinking of is situations where, because people don't register, they actually get less rights. And is that a thing? Like, should people register because it actually helps them? Does not registering actually negatively impact them?
Registration of marriage is compulsory in some states like Tamil Nadu. There's a 2008 state act which says every marriage should be registered, right? But of course, not everybody does, and there is no penal provision that affects them if they don't do that. But registration is useful for a number of reasons. Firstly, to ensure that there is some valid legal statutory document which says that two people are married. Often people, though they go ahead with the entire ceremonial aspects and whatnot, this legal aspect of registering the marriage sometimes they do not do, and that definitely may lead to problems in future, especially when if it's a case of that ends in divorce, then you definitely will be better way to prove that a marriage existed in the first place when you want to apply for a decree of divorce. So again, those are things that are helpful. Notwithstanding divorce, I mean, of course, when children are born, you have to go apply for, let us say one of the parents die, then you apply for a legal heirship certificate for the children and the surviving spouse. The first thing they will ask is, where is your marriage document, right? Of course, you can show photos of your marriage and the invitation. That is pretty much what people should have as proof in place of a marriage certificate, but it does not always cut it before a government authority. So registration is important. Like I said, I don't think it's a bad move at all. It is definitely useful to have marriages registered. Of course, the penal sort of provision that uh, penalizes people for non-registration sounds a little bit too far. This is something that I think it is it's there's enough carrots, legally speaking, for people to go register. But of course, the government thinks that no, we need to throw in a stick to make sure that they don't miss that 1 month window to register. I don't think it is a bad policy move at all, Ruchi. So there are more benefits in registration than
Then
otherwise.
I have a follow-up question on the Islamic piece around the signaling, and that is around just separation of state from religion. Um, Manu, I mean, obviously, the framing generally we read about is the best practice for any state is to separate religion out of it. And obviously, we have recognized Islamic laws. Um, I don't know if it's in certain states or certain situations. You probably have better insight into it. So, isn't that a good thing that we are having a very clear set of rules for people to follow?
So it's an interesting proposition, and I'll tell you why. It goes back to the question of what our country is, and I'll keep it short because I think it's important we deal with this in a succinct manner, right? If you believe India is a conglomeration of multiple ethnicities, each tracing back to centuries, if not thousands of years, each having its own customs, traditions, and ceremonies, each having their own kind of laws, right? Now, in Tamil Nadu, for example, a person can marry their mother's brother's daughter. Okay. Now, let me say that again. So, I can marry my mother's brother's daughter. That is permitted in Tamil tradition for hundreds of years, right? And that is the custom here. Whereas in other parts, that is comes under what is called a prohibited relationship. So here in the Uniform Civil Code, they've given the registrar the power to determine which is prohibited relationships. Now again, the workaround with something like this problem would be that each state will then determine. But what I'm trying to say is there are very many different customs, right? Now, what we feel and what we've come to understand is some of these traditions and customs far, far predate the concept of even Hinduism. Okay. And you have something called the Hindu Marriage Act. And the Hindu Marriage Act says that you have to do, under Section 7, a Saptapadi, a 7 steps around the fire, which there is no relation to any Tamil custom at all. For example, right? We don't need a fire. We don't need the 7 steps. So again, I've seen in other weddings, they have something called the feras and all of that, which are not there in the Tamil custom. So what I'm saying is, if you believe India is got very many ethnicities, very many customs, very many traditions, different people who have come together under the administrative control of this great country, almost I would say to the extent of each being almost a sub-nationality, where they eat differently, they speak differently for sure. They also practice personal culture and traditions differently, then bringing uniformity, I don't think is the solution. All right. In fact, I think it goes counter to what we are trying to do, which is to celebrate the diversity. Now, I don't think anybody is saying that, we want a separate India, but I think you want a law that celebrates that all these different diversities and all these different cultures. I don't think it can be a law which says that, everybody must now follow this particular way. It is this way or out. I don't think that's the way. And partly the Uniform Civil Code is, according to me, a move towards that direction, which sort of says that why can't you just have one law for everyone, one personal law for everyone? Now, that is possible in a different country, in a different setting, but I think India, by way it is even, uh, founded, India, the way it is today, exists, which is through different waves of migration over the last 15,000 years or so. It is through different kinds of, interventions, cultural or otherwise. It is through different invasions over the last, 5,000 6,000 years. I think it is a truly a meeting point or a melting pot for many different customs, many different cultures. So I think when you come up with a uniform law, especially in the personal space, I think that will start impinging upon people's freedoms, their thoughts, their way of lives, and so on. I think
Yeah.
that is why it is important, and I think that is why people feel threatened in some way. So I've answered your question, I know, about Muslims, but from a larger context, why this may not only stop with Muslims, it will go to other cultures, people who feel like what is being projected as a standard boilerplate Hindu or standard boilerplate sort of personal law solution may not really be something that others may find easy to swallow.
And I just want to add, I mean, there's a sort of a legal and a clinical argument to be made about this conversation about a uniform civil code, but there's also a societal reality, Ruchir, like you alluded to. I mean, India is still in many ways, quite conservative in its thinking. Live-in relationships are not something that are quite easily accepted by especially those who are from generations before us. So in the first place, when you put a penalizing force into it, you're really putting a stick on people, and you're deepening the fear. Other than that, I mean, same sex relationships are of course very problematic in India in terms of the dangers associated with making that public, as Manu pointed to. But there's also this whole thing about, and this has been increasingly been prevalent over the last few years, on love jihad. What happens when it is a couple from two different faiths? Are you sort of pointing to them, because that's what the document says? Identify yourself, have other people identify you. What happens when it's an intercaste marriage, where as well we have seen extremely violent incidents associated around a man and a woman from different castes deciding to live with each other, be with each other? So there is, I know, increasingly, when you see this, when you see these incidents, the term that keeps coming up is Orwellian. But I think we're Orwellian, but with a very India focus, and we need to be sort of aware of that. What are we doing with our younger generation? It's like it's fear. I'm the big bad state, and I will tell you because this is for your good. I find that personally quite problematic.
That makes sense, especially the argument around, you know, recognizing subcultures. The thing I find appealing is a level set of expectations, like having same set of rules, and you sort of know what goes and what doesn't go. But obviously, in the wider context, I can see all of the problems that come, and that's the problem with, I guess, laws generally, right? There is an intent, and not all of that is clean. Anyway,
See,
on
Ruchir, hard times make bad laws. So,
fair enough. Shall we move on to the next topic?
yeah, let's do.
Manu, take
Fantastic.
us away.
I'm
Yeah.
going to take over on this, and I'm really looking forward to hearing both of your thoughts, right? Because this is an area I think a lot of people are quite interested in, and possibly now starting to get a little concerned as well. Uh, as you may have all heard, PayTM leading digital payments company in India, is facing a massive crisis after the Reserve Bank of India, the Indian Federal Bank, imposed a series of restrictions on its banking unit, PayTM Payments Bank. The RBI refused to offer concessions to PayTM Payments Bank, including migration of accounts to other banks, or refused to also extend its deadline after February 29. So I think this is a great time for us to dive deep into why the Indian Federal Bank has been after PayTM, to the extent that is some have feared or reported that may even involve investigation into allegations of money laundering. This crisis that Paytm has been facing has snowballed certainly since the RBI's restrictions, and we've seen the company's stock crash on the Bombay Stock Exchange. I think today alone, Paytm's shares have plunged almost 10%, and the entire Paytm brand, which really took off around the time of demonetization and saw widespread uptake across India, across point of service machines, extending its sort of arm into the fast tag toll collection area and everything. All of this, the along with brand Paytm, brand India has taken a hit, right? So firstly, for people who are a little new to this story, or want to know a little bit about brand Paytm and its early successes, maybe I would love to hear from Mitali how you think Paytm set itself up as such a huge brand in India and a leading financial payments company here. And then I'd love to hear from Ruchir what you think has happened could have caused this sort of downfall in Paytm's fortunes, and what you think might happen going forward. So, Mitali, do you want to take us through the Paytm story and then share your thoughts on what is going on?
Yeah, no, thanks, Manu. It's sort of a complex story, and I think with Paytm, it's always been complex stories, which makes it interesting, but also in many ways quite problematic. So I think just to sort of go down a quick history lesson, Paytm itself came into prominence around 2016, which is when demonetization happened. Very shortly after that announcement by the Prime Minister saying this is what's happening, the next day, over the course of the next few days, you started to see these full page ads by a company called PayTM saying, very bold decision, boldest decision in the financial history of independent India. And suddenly more and more people got to know about something called PayTM. They'd been around for a while, but I think this was really a golden moment where this whole mobile wallet solution, which is what I think all of us, I would say, have on our phones now. If not, not just one, we have more than one of these digital wallets. That really came into prominence for Paytm. They'd been around, they'd been experimenting with different businesses, but this one really clicked, and it went down really well for them. And in the course of, I would say, just in that month of November, when demonetization was announced, Paytm grew in leaps and bounds in terms of the subscriptions they got, the number of merchants that started signing on. So it was really a golden phase. That's one point in time for Paytm. The other one is the Reserve Bank itself. So this was, I think, around 2014, 2015. The Reserve Bank released this draft guideline. They wanted to expand the banking space, and they identified two pockets to do that. One was that they were going to give out licenses to payment banks, as they call them, and the other was licensing for small banks. So with payment banks, I think the Reserve Bank's point of view or thought process at that point was, how do we expand financial inclusion? How do we do this in a way that sort of marries technological prowess? And how do we create space to really spread the financial abilities to other parts of India that are not that well accessed? Paytm and Vijay Shekhar Sharma, or VSS as most people call him, have always had ambitions around the banking space, and this is when they put in their bid and they were successful. So what was created was the Paytm Payment Bank Limited. Now they could not they could only accept deposits to a particular amount. They couldn't lend. So there were all those riders that came with it. But all the existing base that Paytm wallets had could get merged into this bank, which instantly created quite a bit by way of numbers. The problem here is, well, twofold from the central bank's point of view, I think. On its own part, it has actually been flagging issues of concern for a while now. They've been pointing out, they've been sending show cause notices. There is a failure to have clear monitoring mechanisms. That is the Reserve Bank's point of view in terms of, what Paytm has not done. There have been repeated reminders. And that, I think, has sort of reached the point where now the central bank has simply put its foot down and said, look, enough is enough. This is not responsible banking behavior, and we don't think this should last. That's fine. My question from the central bank, though, would be, when you open those licenses, did you have a plan, of what happens when it goes wrong? Because, Manu, if you go back to the details of who this was open to, it was mobile telephone companies, supermarket chains, real sector cooperatives. A lot of folks could actually put in their bid. Now, when you have such a wide net of people who could be interested, and you're dealing with something as sensitive as financials or people's finances, do you have a mechanism of what happens when it goes wrong, when it needs to shut up? And I think over here there's a little bit of flailing happening on, what's the best foot forward. That's the central bank's side of it. With Paytm, it's not the first time. There have been complications with Paytm. There have been a number of complications, one around their shareholding. I think the way they went into the share market, as you pointed to, was not okay at all by a lot of people who were watching that space. It was hugely overvalued. There was a lot of bravado from the company itself when they priced it the way they did. I don't know if people tracked it. They would have, because it was one of the largest issues that had hit worldwide. And the day it listed, it crashed. It went down circuit. It went down about 20%. Then it recovered. Then it came out. So day one was very bad. Day two was very bad. And from then on, it's been a little bit of, quite a bit of resistance from the promoters, I would say, to be answerable for something like that. Why did you value it that way? Why are people concerned about the financials of Paytm? And there's always been a little bit of bravado in terms of saying you don't know what the business is about, and you don't know how good the business is going to be, and let the non-believers be the non-believers. So here we are, at the end of it, in a situation where you have minority shareholders who have lost a lot of money. Frankly, I think they come at the bottom of the pyramid, because stocks means risk, right? So get in line. You have a problem with a lot of the depositors. You have a larger problem, as you said, about, is there money laundering involved here? And you have, right on top, a huge loss of trust again in the financial system, which is just, it does more harm than good to have incidents like this. We saw it with Yes Bank a few years back, and now we're seeing it with something as large as Paytm. And I'll, just end with a final point, because I would love to hear Ruchir's view on this. I was just sort of watching the trajectory. So many entrepreneurs have written a joint letter to the government saying this is wrong. We support Vijay. We support Paytm. But it's leaving a really bad taste in the mouth on what's happening in the entrepreneurship space. Either you have these, incidents like what's happening with Byju's, or you have an Ashneer Grover, and it really stinks, honestly, in terms of entrepreneurial behavior. Or on the other side, you have this situation where immediately rumors started saying, oh, maybe Reliance is going to buy into Paytm. And then you're wondering, is there any space left for anyone else to be an entrepreneur or to run a business or to scale a business? Or is it only going to go into the two empires that exist? If any business that's in trouble, let's sell it to Reliance, or maybe let's sell it to Adani. What are we doing to foster the entrepreneurial landscape? I'm not saying that, someone should come in and support Vijay, because honestly, I don't think any of us know the full of it. And if the central bank has raised a red flag, then they've raised a red flag. That has to be above everything else. And the safety and people's finances being kept safe is paramount. But I'm just wondering, what's happening in the Indian entrepreneurial landscape, particularly in a space that has been, fintech has been sexy as toast. I mean, everybody wanted a slice of India's fintech business, and that's where India's economy is going to take us in leaps and bounds. And frankly, right now, it doesn't look like it. But Ruchir, you've been in the trenches. How are you reading
You
something?
know, interestingly, PayTM and I exhibited Langur when I used to own Langur. We were in exhibitions together back in 2011. Obviously, they had a different trajectory from me. So we've been around the trenches together. But um, so let's split the story into two parts. One is where are they now, and what is the entrepreneurship piece. Um, the thing about the Reserve Bank of India, it's one of the few central banks in the world that has teeth. Most central banks are geared towards managing inflation or job levels. This is the bank that actually protects the common man, and I think I actually like that they've always been very sensitive to gross violations. I think there is a point to be made, Mitali, where it's not proactive, which is fair, but often it is reactive. And the reactive piece is geared towards making sure that people are not losing money. So I think
Yeah.
that's not the bad thing. And I think what's clear here when I was doing the research on this is the first notice went to them in 2022 around
Yep.
this issue. So they've had time to deal with this. So your point around bravado or arrogance is fair. It's like, hey, you've had the time to deal with this and you've chosen to ignore this issue for such a long time. The other story of PayTM is also of resilience. I mean, they have had a bunch of roller coasters and somehow have managed to create the merchant network and a user network that is as large as it is. So, counting VSS or the promoters of PayTM out is like it might be a mistake. As in, we don't know quite yet how this will play out. What it look, I mean, anecdotally, some of my friends have started receiving KYC notices on their phone. So they've already started implementing changes attached to the notice, which means that they are trying to fix the issue. Um, because of the merchant infiltration that they have, I think they will survive and manage to come out of this situation. But they'll have to make sure that they play by the rules, which is a fair requirement. The broader entrepreneurship piece where entrepreneurs are fighting to defend, I mean, I think some of it is posturing and, good. It's not about, India's story is suffering because PayTM has been blacklisted. I mean, I think ultimately, if they had been doing good KYC or following the rules well, it wouldn't have happened. So this is not a stain on entrepreneurship. This is a stain on PayTM's fast growth where they chose to ignore certain aspects of the rules. Let's be clear. Um, is there a broader challenge in the space around fintech, say like the Ashni Grover story or like around Baiju's and so on? I think these stories are everywhere. I don't think this is an India specific problem. I mean, like WeWork, Adam Newman is trying to buy back WeWork going through its bankruptcy. I mean, what an incredible story. The guy exited at like four then or something billion and is now trying to buy it back for zero. So I think the people doing these crazy trades, raising at crazy valuations, there are many factors at play, including the entrepreneurs selling a bigger story than reality. Um, the market, in my view, because I'm still in the trenches, I continue to enjoy being in the trenches. The market has become a lot more sensible, and those crazy valuations, at least in the current environment, are not taking place. So I think it'll levelize. We do need a we needed a sensible we needed some sort of sensible adjustment in terms of uh, market expectations from companies, and that has taken place in the last 6 to 12 months. So
Is it also though, Ruchir, let me ask you, because you've been an entrepreneur in what I think we can term them as new businesses and not
mm,
old economy
mm,
businesses, right?
mm, mm.
Is there an attitude among some of the entrepreneurs, because this is a point of criticism that's been raised of, you know we're a new business, we're emerging, we need light touch regulation, like don't go really heavy and deep with us. Whereas, I don't know, for example, imagine a cement plant, and if they didn't meet the specifications,
Yeah,
that's it, people are going to come down very heavily on them, whether it's
yeah,
government or anybody else. Is there a sense amongst this younger, and I use the term younger loosely,
yeah.
younger businesses and younger entrepreneurs saying, hey, regulations, but not a lot of them, okay, because we're still finding our way.
Mitali, that was the story of all the IT businesses, Wipro, TCS, Infosys. Like the thing they used to celebrate in NASSCOM conferences for a very long time is we made it because the government didn't understand us. And that story has now played out for 24 years or so. There is a view in the entrepreneurship space that less regulation is better. The only piece on the other end is you also don't want regulatory capture. What you don't want is so much regulation that only two people can execute on something. So we have to find the right balance. And the problem always is that, especially in newer spaces, government bureaucrats are not able to keep up with the way the sector is evolving. Like AI, for example, is a hot space right now. And
Yeah.
there is very limited guidelines from the government on how one should think about machine learning and how that plays out in day to day. So, and they won't be able. I think they will take 3 to 5 years to actually understand how this can go bad. So that is a challenge. Whether you like it or not, the government is not going to lead the way on more regulation.
And Manu, I have one more rant before I stop. And I know you told me this on the first episode that we recorded, that we will keep coming back to the role of the media. And I do come back to the role of business media in this. As Ruchir was pointing out, the RBI put out notices, red flags. There have been a series of them starting from 2021. There were a few voices that said, hang on a minute, you can't value this IPO this way. It is not it is not useful for people who are participating in it. I don't recall a lot of the major business channels or a lot of the key business newspapers actually picking that up. I mean, how often did you see the fact that, hang on, this has been flagged off for PayTM? Hang on, this is what the Reserve Bank is saying. I mean, part of what you do as responsible journalism is holding these people to account. Because I am writing a piece around this, I've been sort of going through interviews, and as recently as Davos, that happens every year, there are these fawning interviews between the business channel and people like VSS, saying, what's your message to India's entrepreneurs? What do you want to say about the entrepreneurial landscape? I mean, if you keep pandering this way to a space that you think is your ally, you are being both irresponsible and ultimately shooting yourself in the foot, because now to backtrack on that and say, no, but this is very wrong, you just end up looking foolish.
It's an
Hopefully,
interesting point that you raised, Mitali, and I want to add in, and of course,
Yeah.
Ruchir, I think you should have the last word on this. I think I read somewhere a very reliable sort of survey or projection was that India's fintech business empire would grow to around 2 trillion US dollars in 2030, and that PayTM, I think today boasts around 10 crore monthly users or subscribers, and it is expanding at a rate that is quite exponential and astronomical. These are the sort of the real sort of why do we feel good about India stories, right? PayTM, led by a person who's not this huge, like I said, like a huge IIT, IIM, Harvard, Oxford star, but
Yeah.
still somebody,
No generational wealth. Yeah.
exactly, right? But at the same time, also add to that this great sense of pride in our country itself. We are looking for success stories. We are looking for our superstars in these domains, which, to be fair, I don't think we've unearthed enough or commensurate to our potential. So I think when you get a few of these combined with the fact that, of course, there is this great push for what India means to the world, and India, politically and business wise, positioning itself as this global superpower. And then you find these success stories. I think I can relate to why it is hard for media to not put distance, right? I mean, they're now part of that story. The personal, emotional becomes also this story that they support the superstar, rock star that you see. And we've seen this across, right? I mean, I think we've seen Byju's, we've seen, I think there was some controversy. You mentioned Ashneer Grover. I think there was a controversy with Bharat Pay. You've seen many of these companies hitting these sort of ceilings and then not able to break through. And then that also brings this larger question that you raised initially, Mitali. Are we doing enough to support as a country, as a regulatory system, or as a enabling architecture? Are we doing enough to support these kinds of entrepreneurs as well? Make sure that they stay within the four lines, because you may get through a few of these hurdles, but then you'll get stuck or unstuck somewhere. So I think that's an interesting sort of play, not only on this particular on PayTM, but across Indian businesses. Ruchir, I know you want to say the last word, and as you should on
And
this.
Manu, I have one cheeky question for Ruchir with his last word, which is that Ruchir, why is it that all these entrepreneurs of all these like sexy spaces decide to move out of the country, but then keep the business inside the country? Is there sort of, are they more and more aware of the risk that comes with running a business in India? So they see the value of it's a huge market, so they see that value, but it also comes with attendant risk, so they decide to sort of just move base, but keep the market running.
It's a tricky question. You might get me in trouble, but the no, I mean, I know of a fair few people who move for tax reasons, and I think that's not a great reason. Especially when capital gains is around the corner, when they know that they're going to have a liquidity event where they're going to make money, they move out 1 or 2 years in advance of that. Hey, please pay taxes. I love paying. I mean, our country needs the money, not the politicians, but the country needs the money. So where you can, please pay the taxes. And I pay my taxes in India, even though I live abroad, and I'm happy to. Um, on the just the entrepreneur piece, the piece that we lost track of, the whole venture funding industry lost track of in 2021, 2022, is people lost track of the underlying economics of all of these businesses. So the valuations at which things were funded and the returns people expected on things. Ultimately, a payment infrastructure business should be valued like a bank. An edtech business should be valued like let's say, a university or an online university. Maybe there is no infrastructure. But the kind of valuations they were getting were exorbitant. So I think that is the piece where people have been disappointed, because it was supposed to be a growth story, and then obviously the valuations. That's the only thing I want to add. Let's start wrapping up the episode. Manu wants me to call Aapne Suna Kya. Have you heard? A staunch supporter of a two-language system in India. Let's go to Have You Heard this week. It's a segment we're trying to shine a light on interesting stories that we've come across. Something we can end on a lighter note on. Why don't you go first, Mitali? Have you heard something on your mind?
I think just going by the new coinage, we must start with Manu. With have you heard, Manu? What have you heard? We want to know.
Okay, I've not only heard but watched and then reflected on this. So last week, Indian bowler playing for the Indian cricket team, Jasprit Bumrah, became the fastest Indian bowler to take 150 test wickets. And he beat Kapil Dev, Mohammad Shami, Ravichandran Ashwin, amongst others, to sort of do that. Right now, this is fantastic, and he's a very good bowler. He has a very quirky action, but extremely effective across all formats. And of course, many people across India know how good he is. But this is why I think this story is worth talking about today here. I mean, the week that he became the fastest Indian to get 150 wickets, and he's on the rise, to be the number one bowler in the world. In September 2023, so 4 months ago, halfway through an international competition, the Asia Cup, then Jasprit Bumrah took a leave of absence to be with his wife for the birth of their child. And there was equal parts criticism, but like I said, luckily people are also supportive of this, right? And this is in quite a stark contrast to earlier generations of not just cricketers, many people in who play competitive professional sports, to say that no, my my career, my duty to my country, my commitment to my teammate comes first over all things considered, and family. But of course, more than family, also to something like the delivery of a child, which is essentially seen as something the woman can and must handle, and typically also must handle with the support of her parents, not even my part of the family. So I think I was very happy to note that Bumrah did that. And sort of, he was, I think, like I said, equal parts trolled, and people sort of said, what is this, how can he leave the Indian cricket team in the middle of a tournament and all of that. But I'm glad that he did that, and he's come back, and he's also shown, I guess, people who are still watching him closely, that you can do that, balance family life or otherwise, and still sort of be the fastest Indian bowler to reach 150 wickets. So I think that's a great story in itself.
I think if they had a lawyer category, you would win that, Manu. Ruchir, I know you have a flight to catch. Do you want to go next?
Um, Mine is a tech one. I've been playing with a lot of artificial intelligence tools. The one on my mind is Perplexity.ai. Perplexity.ai. It's effectively a search engine. You can ask it any question, and it will give you the answer rather than giving you the 10 blue links. Um, I'm not saying it's always accurate, but 90% of the time, I don't have to open Google. So it's replaced Google for me. It's really good. I'd highly recommend it um, if you're looking for the answers to factual questions. It's fantastic.
Super. And I'll close the loop. I think I'll go as many steps back as you have gone forward with tech, Ruchir, which is that I was watching the Grammys, and of course, there's a lot of talk about India's win at the Grammys, but I think I felt really mainstream, as a friend put it, because there was Annie Lennox, there was Tracy Chapman, so it really felt like someone was listening to my generation, and it went back to a time when I was a young girl, and there was only Doordarshan, and it was only Doordarshan that would beam this stuff. And the Grammys were sort of the high point of your life, including the Oscars. These two things that they beamed, and I was wondering, for people listening, we would love to hear, I think, what your sort of Doordarshan memory is, because this one is so clear in my mind. This epic moment of sitting down and watching the Grammys, and our first window into what was popular culture outside of what we were seeing in India. So very special to see that, and very special to see them perform as well.
Great. Thank you. That's the end of our fourth episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Like Mitali said, you can share your feedback at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com, or find any one of us on X, formerly Twitter. The podcast is at TID, the India Dialogue, TID_podcast on X.com, or India Dialogue Podcast on YouTube. Manu is at Manuraj1983, Mitali at Mitali Live, Ruchir at Ruchir_P. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again in a week. Bye.